one argument, one reckless choice, one moment where stubbornness beats common sense. These stories show everyday confrontations turning fatal, where entitlement meets reality. Not freak accidents, but preventable deaths driven by arrogance, impatience, and refusing to back down until it's too late. It was July 4th, 2017, at Lake Lanier, Georgia. A crowded holiday gathering filled a narrow wooden dock with music, coolers, and constant movement between boats, while submerged hazards below the surface went largely unnoticed. Pamela Rhodes was 49 years old and worked in an office support role that required organization, follow-through, and enforcing procedures. Friends described her as assertive and opinionated, especially in group settings where she felt order was being ignored. She often inserted herself into situations without being asked, convinced that problems escalated only because others failed to act quickly enough. Pamela attended the gathering with friends and acquaintances to celebrate the holiday. Alcohol was present throughout the afternoon, and guests moved freely between boats and the dock. The structure was older, built for light foot traffic rather than sustained crowds. Wooden planks showed visible wear, with gaps widening near the edges. Beneath the surface, submerged support beams sat just below varying water depths due to fluctuating lake levels that summer. As the afternoon progressed, congestion increased along the dock. A large cooler filled with ice and drinks had been placed near the edge earlier in the day to serve people stepping off boats. Several guests had already mentioned that it should be moved back toward the center once traffic increased. One man began preparing to relocate it, but was waiting for help to lift it safely, as it was heavy and partially wedged against the planks. Pamela noticed the cooler and became visibly irritated. Witnesses later stated she complained that it was blocking movement and creating a hazard, insisting it should not be there at all. When told it would be moved shortly, she dismissed the explanation and continued gesturing, positioning herself closer to the edge of the dock as she argued. Rather than waiting, Pamela stepped toward the cooler and kicked it sharply, attempting to force it away from the edge. The sudden movement shifted her weight backward. At the same moment, her heel slipped into a widened gap between two planks. With no railing to stop her, she lost balance and fell backward over the side of the dock. Pamela went headfirst into the water, striking a submerged wooden support beam with significant force. The impact fractured her cervical spine. She lost consciousness immediately and sank briefly before resurfacing near the dock. Several guests witnessed the fall and shouted for help. 2 people entered the water, while others tried to locate her position from above. Rescue efforts were delayed by limited visibility and submerged beams obstructing movement. Pamela was pulled from the water several minutes later and laid flat on the dock. Emergency services were called immediately. First responders arrived by boat and shoreline access within approximately 10 minutes. Pamela showed no signs of consciousness and was not breathing effectively. Resuscitation efforts began on scene but were unsuccessful. The medical examiner determined death resulted from blunt force trauma to the neck combined with drowning. The spinal fracture prevented voluntary movement or effective breathing. Toxicology testing showed alcohol present, but not at incapacitating levels. Investigators documented overcrowding beyond the dock's intended capacity and cited the owner for failing to post occupancy warnings. The death was ruled accidental. The gathering ended immediately, and the dock was later modified to restrict future events. It was October 22, 2017, in Paramus, New Jersey. A major weekend sale packed a suburban shopping center with cars and pedestrians. Traffic stalled in narrow lanes, horns sounded, and shoppers moved between idling vehicles as congestion erased any margin for error. Lorraine Buckley was 51 and had shopped at the center for years. She planned her errands carefully and arrived that afternoon with a short list built around bundled discounts and limited quantity deals she didn't want to miss. She believed being early and prepared entitled her to move through the process without delays. When other shoppers disrupted that expectation, she tended to see it as unfair behavior rather than normal congestion. She preferred a specific parking area close to the main entrance, which she considered her usual spot due to how often she used it. That afternoon, she arrived expecting heavier traffic because of the sale, but did not anticipate how crowded the lot had become. As she crept through the lanes, frustration mounted. The delays conflicted with her plan to get inside quickly before popular items sold out. The parking lot was laid out with angled spaces, concrete wheel stops, and narrow drive lanes bordered by pedestrian walkways. A slight downhill grade ran through the central aisle, subtle, but enough to allow a vehicle to roll if it was not fully secured. Surveillance cameras mounted on tall light poles monitored entrances and several sections of the lot. After several minutes of waiting, Lorraine saw a vehicle back out of a space near the entrance, one she regularly used during past visits. Before she could reach it, another driver approached from the opposite direction and pulled in first. Lorraine slowed anyway, lingering in the lane as if the space had been hers to take. Traffic stacked behind Lorraine, blocking her path forward. Instead of continuing on, she stopped her car in the traffic lane and stepped out to confront the driver who had already parked, insisting the space had been hers to take. In her frustration, she left the engine running and did not fully place the transmission into park. The lane sloped slightly downhill. As Lorraine stood beside the open driver's door, the car began to roll backward. The movement was slow but steady. With the door open and a concrete parking barrier directly behind her, there was no space to step clear. Within seconds, the vehicle pinned her between the door frame and the barrier. Nearby, shoppers witnessed her chest being compressed against the barrier and rushed to help. Several pushed the vehicle forward while another person climbed into the driver's seat to stop it. Emergency services were called immediately from nearby storefronts. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found Lorraine unresponsive, suffering from severe blunt force trauma and ineffective breathing. Resuscitation efforts were attempted but unsuccessful. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was traumatic compression of the chest and abdomen, resulting in collapsed lungs and extensive internal bleeding. Investigators found no mechanical defects in the vehicle. Surveillance footage confirmed the car had not been secured before she exited and showed no interference by other drivers. The death was ruled accidental and attributed to driver error. The shopping center later installed additional signage reminding drivers not to stop in traffic lanes and to secure vehicles before exiting. The opposing driver was cleared of responsibility, and the case was closed after administrative review. It was December 17, 2017 in Quezon City, Philippines. A small Christmas gathering was underway inside a mid-rise condominium unit, decorated with string lights, a compact artificial tree, and wrapped gifts clustered beneath it. The unit was warm and crowded, with movement flowing between the living room and a narrow hallway that led toward the building's interior stairwell. Holiday music played softly, and the mood was relaxed as the group prepared for a simple exchange gift. Marissa Delgado was 42 and had joined 3 close friends for the exchange. Although the gift rules had been agreed on well in advance, she had postponed shopping until the last minute and arrived with an unwrapped item in a plain bag. Inside the unit, she barely glanced at the decorations. Her focus went straight to the gifts beneath the tree, particularly a large box positioned near the front, which she immediately associated with higher value. The group settled into the living room and began the exchange gift. Names were drawn casually, and gifts were handed out one by one. When it was Marissa's turn, she received the smallest package. Inside was a purse bag, new, clean, and appropriate for the exchange. Others smiled, but Marissa's expression tightened. The size difference stood out to her. She glanced repeatedly at the larger gift beneath the tree, convinced it represented better value. As the exchange wrapped up, Marissa grew visibly agitated. She fixated on fairness, replaying the moment in her head. Instead of letting it go, she stood and moved into the hallway, signaling for one friend to follow. The narrow corridor led past the unit's entrance toward a concrete stairwell used as a secondary exit. The lighting there was dimmer, and the sound of the party faded behind them. The discussion escalated quickly. Marissa paced while gesturing, insisting the exchange had been uneven and that she had been shortchanged. She stepped backward as she spoke, focused on the argument rather than her footing. The stairwell door behind her had been left ajar earlier to allow airflow. There was no guardrail at the threshold, only a short landing before the steps dropped away. As she continued moving, her heel missed the top step. She lost balance and fell backward into the stairwell. Her body struck the concrete steps as she tumbled down a full flight, coming to rest on the landing below. The fall was witnessed immediately by the friend following her, who called out for help. The others rushed in and found Marissa motionless at the base of the stairs. Blood was visible around her head, and her breathing was irregular. Emergency services were called at once. Paramedics arrived within minutes and attempted resuscitation, but Marissa never regained consciousness. She was pronounced dead at the scene due to severe head trauma and internal injuries sustained in the fall. The medical examiner later confirmed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head and torso. Toxicology testing showed no drugs and only minimal alcohol. Investigators found no defects in the stairwell or building structure. The death was ruled accidental, caused by a loss of balance during an argument. The party ended immediately. The remaining gifts stayed under the tree, unopened. It was February 6, 2018 in Toledo, Ohio. Snow lined the sidewalks of a quiet residential block where a row of duplexes sat under dim streetlights. Inside one unit, the evening was uneventful. Maintenance requests were normally handled through a standard property system, with non-urgent issues scheduled days in advance. Nothing about the night suggested it would end in an emergency. Marcia Klein was 39 and worked in retail management. Co-workers described her as demanding and impatient, often escalating minor issues into confrontations. She expected immediate results and treated delays as personal slights. That same attitude had followed her home. Over several months, she had repeatedly clashed with property management, calling frequently and accusing staff of negligence over small inconveniences. That evening, a decorative glass lamp in her living room stopped working. It was not wired into the unit and had no connection to the building's electrical system. Property management explained that decorative items were the tenant's responsibility and did not qualify for emergency repair. Marcia reacted angrily, accusing staff of refusing to do their jobs and threatening to withhold rent. After several minutes of shouting, she ended the call and decided to fix the problem herself. Rather than replacing the lamp or waiting for a repair service, Marcia searched online and convinced herself the issue was a simple wiring fault. She believed professional repairs were unnecessary and intentionally overpriced. Ignoring manufacturer warnings printed on the lamp's base, she retrieved a screwdriver and extension cord from a storage closet. She placed the lamp on her kitchen counter near the stovetop and began dismantling its base. The wiring inside showed visible heat damage and fraying. Instead of disconnecting power, Marcia plugged the lamp into an outlet to test it while continuing to work. When the lamp failed to turn on, she repositioned it closer to the stove to improve visibility, inadvertently resting the cord against an active burner. Within minutes, the insulation on the cord began to melt. As Marcia leaned over the counter, the exposed wiring sparked, the cord ignited, and flames spread quickly up the plastic casing and into the lamp's base. Startled, Marcia attempted to pull the cord away, but the fire intensified, producing thick black smoke. The smoke filled the small kitchen rapidly. Instead of evacuating, Marcia attempted to smother the flames with a dish towel, which ignited immediately. Disoriented and coughing, she stumbled backward and collapsed near the kitchen doorway. The fire burned itself out shortly after consuming the cord and lamp base. A neighbor in the adjoining unit noticed the smell of smoke and called emergency services. Responders arrived to find Marcia unresponsive inside the smoke-filled apartment. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was smoke inhalation, with high levels of carbon monoxide and soot found in her lungs. Fire investigators ruled the incident accidental, caused by improper electrical handling and refusal to disconnect power during a repair attempt. Property management records documented repeated warnings about unauthorized repairs. The case was closed without charges. Investigators noted the death was preventable and directly linked to unsafe behavior during an unnecessary confrontation with a routine household issue. It was August 18, 2015 in Bakersfield, California. Late summer heat hung over an industrial rail corridor where freight trains passed daily, often unnoticed by nearby residents. The area appeared familiar and routine to those who lived nearby, yet it carried constant risk that rarely announced itself until it was too late. Elaine Porter was 56 years old and worked in a supervisory clerical role for a mid-size local operation. Her job required managing schedules, enforcing procedures, and meeting deadlines with limited tolerance for delay. Co-workers described her as efficient and blunt, with little patience for delays or disagreement, viewing obstacles as inefficiencies rather than warnings. She believed rules were optional when they interfered with efficiency, especially when she considered herself capable of managing the risk. Elaine lived within walking distance of an active rail line that cut between residential streets and commercial areas. Over time, residents formed an unofficial dirt footpath across the tracks, cutting less than 5 minutes off the walk while bypassing a marked pedestrian crossing 2 blocks away. Despite posted warning signs and fencing gaps, the path remained in use. Elaine used it regularly and had previously argued with neighbors who warned her about train traffic, insisting the concern was exaggerated and the shortcut harmless. On that afternoon, Elaine was returning from an errand and chose the shortcut as she had many times before. Freight traffic was heavier than usual due to seasonal shipping demands, and trains were operating at standard speeds. Warning signs prohibiting pedestrian crossing were visible on both sides of the corridor, but no crossing gates or signals were present at that location. As Elaine approached the tracks, a nearby pedestrian raised both arms and shouted, stepping toward the rails to warn her of an approaching train. She waved the warning off without slowing and stepped onto the ballast gravel between the rails. The rail line curved slightly, limiting sight distance in one direction. The sound of the approaching train blended with surrounding industrial noise. The freight train emerged from the curve, traveling at approximately 45 miles per hour. The engineer applied emergency braking immediately upon seeing Elaine, but the required stopping distance far exceeded the remaining track. Elaine attempted to rush the remaining distance, but her footing failed on loose ballast gravel never designed for speed or balance. She fell forward onto the track bed as the locomotive closed the remaining distance in seconds. The front of the train struck her with overwhelming force, causing catastrophic blunt force trauma. The train continued past the point of impact before coming to a complete stop. Nearby workers and pedestrians witnessed the collision and contacted emergency services immediately. The engineer radioed the incident as soon as the train stopped. First responders arrived within minutes but found Elaine unresponsive, with injuries incompatible with survival. Her body showed extensive trauma consistent with a high-speed train impact. There were no signs of defensive movement or prolonged suffering. The scene was secured, and rail traffic was halted during the investigation. The coroner ruled the death the result of massive blunt force trauma consistent with a high-speed train impact. Toxicology showed no intoxicants. Investigators reviewed onboard footage and braking data, confirming the engineer followed protocol and no mechanical failures occurred. The death was classified as accidental trespassing. Rail authorities reinforced fencing, removed the footpath, upgraded warning signs, and the case was closed after administrative review. It was March 19, 2016, in Mesa, Arizona. A busy grocery store prepared for a weekend surge as restocking crews worked alongside customers in tight aisles. Pallet jacks moved steadily, carts queued, and small conflicts surfaced in confined spaces. The environment appeared routine, yet the overlap of machinery and foot traffic created immediate physical risk. Sandra Holt was 54 years old and worked in a clerical records role for a regional office. Her position required accuracy, compliance, and strict adherence to procedure. Co-workers described her as methodical, rigid, and quick to correct mistakes she observed in others. She believed rules existed to prevent disorder and felt obligated to enforce them. Outside work, Sandra applied the same mindset to public settings. She regularly confronted strangers over line etiquette, spacing, and store policies. She had previously argued with grocery staff about checkout procedures and stocking practices. That morning, she entered the store during a peak restock window when inventory carts filled the aisles. The store layout featured narrow aisles lined with steel shelving anchored to the concrete floor. Restocking crews used manual pallet jacks carrying loads exceeding 2,000 pounds. Store policy instructed customers to yield during active stocking, but enforcement relied on cooperation rather than barriers. As Sandra moved through a central aisle, she encountered an employee pulling a loaded pallet jack forward. She stepped directly behind the pallet jack while it was being maneuvered and began gesturing, intentionally blocking its movement. Witnesses later stated she refused to step aside, insisting she had the right to stop the operation because customers were entitled to unrestricted aisle access. Another employee approached from the opposite direction to help guide the moving pallet through the narrow clearance, signaling that the equipment was actively in motion. The combined activity increased pressure in the confined space. The floor sloped slightly toward a refrigeration unit. The pallet jack shifted. The loaded platform rolled backward as weight transferred unevenly. Sandra remained positioned behind it. There was no warning horn or automatic brake. The metal frame struck her lower body and pinned her against a steel shelving upright. The force crushed her pelvis and compressed her torso. Shelving flexed but did not detach. Sandra collapsed as internal bleeding began and became unresponsive shortly afterward. Bystanders rushed forward. Several attempted to pull the pallet jack away while another employee called emergency services. The equipment was moved enough to free her, but she remained unresponsive. Paramedics arrived within several minutes. They found Sandra without a detectable pulse and with severe traumatic injuries. Resuscitation efforts began on scene but were unsuccessful. She was pronounced dead before transport. The medical examiner determined death resulted from massive internal hemorrhage caused by pelvic fractures and thoracic compression. Injuries were consistent with crush force from industrial equipment. Toxicology testing showed no intoxicants. Investigators reviewed store surveillance footage, which confirmed the sequence of events and showed no reckless operation by employees. The pallet jack functioned normally, and the load was within limits. The primary factor cited was deliberate pedestrian interference with active industrial equipment. The death was ruled accidental. No charges were filed. The store modified restocking procedures, adding temporary aisle closures during heavy pallet movement. The case was closed after administrative review. Authorities concluded the incident was preventable through better separation of customers and equipment, and no fault was assigned to employees involved. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.